releases rather than pushing it all until 9.8. I anticipate that patches will be available for all ESPs. So no matter what version you're running, you can still be able to get patches for it as long as it's an ESP version. And that as of the next major release of 9.7, you won't have patches, you'll just sort of have the functionality native. And it's worth mentioning that the patches are only necessary in the recursive name server that you want to use to subscribe to this with. It is not something that you have to do in order to be a data producer. As a data producer, this is just another zone. Any more questions on this? Okay. I'm shocked because this is a really bad idea, and I can think of 10 different complaints that this audience ought to have about it. So I'll mention some of them. This is an attack on network neutrality. And I'm not saying it will be used by, let's say, Google and Verizon in their war on each other as to who owns the eyeball, but this will absolutely make the DNS less reliable, and it will cause various people, let's say that you're in some country that is at war with some other country, you could end up not being able to resolve the domain names of the other country because the place where you are might legislate the use of an RPZ by all ISPs that would cause the other thing to not exist. This will make that easier, and we are going to see inroads made into DNS reachability using this tool set. I believe that's bad, but I believe that not doing it is worse. The total cost paid by humanity will be higher if we don't do this. I have very mixed feelings about doing something deliberately to make DNS less reliable. You should have those too. Nobody? Okay. Let's move to the next PDF file, please. So I announced this about 3 years ago to give you an idea about the way things can change. This was at first announced inside of a secret handshake society and was considered too sensitive to be shared publicly. And I have deleted a few slides, not because they were too sensitive, but because they referred to things we promised we would do that I never did. But otherwise, this presentation has become less sensitive over time. It no longer matters if there are some e-criminals in the audience here and you hear about this. Same content, different time, less sensitivity. I love the way things can change. So, when Chris spoke in the first keynote today, he said that it was kind of bad to play whack-a-mole with people, and that if all you were going to do is react and react late, then it was at best a false sense of security, and at worst, you would sort of, I don't know what he said, it was worse than that, but the false sense of security is certainly true. I've been thinking about this in biological terms, and I've likened it to what happens if you overprescribe antibiotics. If you have a doctor who sees a lot of families, and so mom brings in the kid has got fever, and the fever is due to some bacterial infection, and the doctor could say, well, just go home, this will work its way out. If you prescribe this syrupy pink bubblegum fluid stuff that will make the kid feel better overnight, the doctor is likely to issue the prescription because either he's a businessman and he wants repeat business from that customer, or he is a humanitarian and he wants the suffering and whatever it's going to be. If you do that on a really wide scale, in other words, if you do it in every country and you do it for decades, then statistically, which is what a lot of biology is based on, you're going to knock out a lot of the weaker strains of the types of bacterial infections that even the strongest ones, which might not have been sensitive to the antibiotic in question. Worse than that, you will kill some and only weaken others. And when you halfway kill some of these bacterial cells and they go on to reproduce, they will tend to reproduce antibiotic-resistant offspring. And so if you do something at scale that is improving your attacker, then you might not be doing the best good for humanity in this century, even though you're doing clearly the best good for that kid who's in that doctor's office on that day. This also shows up with antibiotic soaps. In America, if you go into a grocery store to buy soap that you're going to use in your bathroom at your house, you can't get one anymore that does not include an antibiotic element. In other words, they want to kill the germs, not just flush them off of your hands and down the drain. And it's the same problem. And I have noted that as we go about finding these botnets, and we kill the botnet, or we find the botnet and we find the command and control, and we cut off the command and control, the botnet is sitting there and there's no way to be commanded or controlled. And then that security researcher goes home feeling good, walking tall, saying, yes, I did something today. I made the world a safer place. Let me tell you what else you did, which is you educated the person who created that botnet that if they make themselves too easy to find, too easy to target, too easy to stop, that they're going to have to spend all day tomorrow rebuilding another botnet like that one, and that's a pain. And so they should do a better job tomorrow. But you left them free. You educated them. Maybe you threw an inside fastball, made them back off the plate a little bit, but you educated them, and they get to come back tomorrow smarter. And they will recreate the botnet that you killed in hours. So let me just say, please stop doing that. If you are in the business of hunting botnets, could you make a relationship with your local law enforcement people or distant law enforcement people so that as you come into the possession of evidence about bad people doing bad things, you can sort of help us lock them up? Because if there isn't human cost to this type of crime, then we're not going to do anything except accelerate it. All of these weird little half measures we do about killing botnets are crazy, right? I understand the antivirus industry pretty well. It is pretty dead. I understand that there are ways that they can stage a recovery, but in general, I agree with Chris, it's reactive, and we will always be behind. And the talk I'm about to give is how we're going to catch up. But if what we're doing is protecting weak software with these band-aids, with these antivirus products, then do we really want it to be that people who pirate Microsoft software in a lot of parts of the world, most Microsoft users are pirated copies? If these people are afraid to download NSRT, the Microsoft remediation tool, and they're afraid to download patches from Microsoft because they don't want to be caught having pirated Windows, do we really think that any reactive solution, no matter how fast it is going to affect that user community? And do we think the rest of the digital economy can be safe if that huge subset of Windows users are never patched and not running any kind of antivirus? I think that's kind of a crazy set of assumptions. If we want to make a difference, we're going to have to be less crazy. Some talk about passive DNS. This is something we did before RPZ, but it turns out to be relevant today. Normally, when you do a DNS transaction, you're a home user, and you ask for www.google.com. You really just want the address of the web server so you can get the form and type your search term and so on. But behind the scenes, you are a stub resolver. you were talking to a recursive name server at your ISP or at your IT department within your company, that server is then talking to other servers that are called authority servers. And those two servers are exchanging information and filling some local cache with the data that that population needs. And the server-to-server traffic is of extreme benefit to us in the security industry. So if you can get a lot of that type of response data and put it in a database, then you can collect it, store it, analyze it, draw a lot of interesting conclusions from it. And it's worth noting, there's usually a civil libertarian or two in any given audience. Let me just point out, we don't collect anything about the users. We do not have the address of the customer. We only have the addresses of the two servers. There's no personally identifiable information here. Now, this allows you, the types of analysis that you might do is to say, all right, I know that there is some terrible content, and usually the example given is child pornography. There's some just terrible content that is present on a given server, and I know that server's IP address, but I don't know what domain names people are using to reach that. Okay, there's no normal DNS query that you can give to say, please tell me all of the names that resolve to a given IP address. But if you've been capturing and storing and building databases out of a whole bunch of server-to-server traffic from all over the world for a period of years, then you know all the names that have ever been used that resulted in that IP address. And that turns out to be a powerful tool because you can then find out, okay, what other IP addresses have those names ever pointed to? And so somebody who's starting to look at a given, and again, I'll continue using child pornography as an example here. Somebody's looking for the perpetrators and trying to find out exactly who did it and who's looking at it and all the rest of it. This is a great tool. Yes, it's also a great tool for government censorship and repression. I don't know what to do about that, I'm sorry. So, wish to thank Florian Weimar, who invented this during his master's degree in Germany. He was angry that the .de people were allowed to close zone transfers for .de from German citizens. Considered the DE zone to be government or public property, thought that everybody should be able to see what it was. And when they closed zone transfer access, he decided to build this in order to recreate the zone outside of .de so that at least the parts that were being used would be visible to anybody who wanted to see them. Was a huge thing for the law enforcement community to have access to this kind of thing. I can't begin to go through the examples. It looks like I'm not going to have a lot of time for a demo, but I'll be here all week. If you want to see a demo of this, I'll be happy to show you. So the problem with what Florian did and what various other people who followed in his footsteps did was that each person who wanted to build a database like this had to start out by placing sensors all over the internet. Now, if you're an older person and you have a deep Rolodex of everybody that you ever went to school with, or you're on LinkedIn and you're 2 degrees of separation away from everybody who does this kind of thing, you might be able to build a reasonable sensor network. More likely, you're going to run into somebody who's operating a server. You wish they would run a sensor for you, and they're going to say, look, I'm already running one for Florian and everybody else. I have sensor fatigue. I understand that. I myself wouldn't want to run a sensor for everybody who came and knocked on my door. So we came up with Security Information Exchange as a way to centralize all that. We do keep the spammers out. So people who want to look at our data in order to find out what names they ought to be registering so they can camp on them and sell ads, they're going to have trouble with our contracting process. There's also national privacy laws, even though we're not collecting personally identified